watching Reason and Theology Live. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Welcome back to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael, on a Wednesday evening, joined by, once again, Louis Dizon, who's continuing his lecture series on Basics of Biblical Hebrew. I believe this is the 7th lecture. Louis, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Glad that we were able to get this far.
Yeah.
So, we're covering chapters 8 and 9 for the textbook, which is some prefixes, and then after that, we're learning some stuff about numerals. So,
okay. Awesome.
Actually,
Awesome. Well, just go ahead and take it away. I'll be here listening, but I'll get out of your way like normal.
All right. Let me do the share screen. All right. Should be visible now. So last session we learned about pronominal suffixes, and in the workbook, as custom, I try to cover exercises for the chapters that had been covered the previous session. So these are the exercises for chapter 8, nouns with pronominal suffixes. So it's fairly simple. Identify the word and then the suffixes that are attached to it. So the first word we have here is the word tabachav, which is the word tabach, which roughly means like the one that slaughters. It's like a butcher. And you might note that there is a yod here. So this would normally be a plural form. So you would have, in plural, this would be tabachim, except we have a vav here. So this is actually the plural form with the third person pronominal suffix here. It'd be like his butchers, something along those lines. And then devari, which you may recognize the word devar, which is the word for word or thing. And then the first person suffix here, which is a hirek yod, and that means my word. And then you have the word chalamotenu. Halomotenu. So you have the word halom, which is the word for dream. And because it's feminine, the plural form has the ot ending, the cholim vav and then the tet. And then attached to that is the standard first person plural pronominal suffix. So you add the tsere yod if it's this form. So chalamotenu, literally our dreams. And then makomech. So makom is the word for place, and it's an interesting word because the verb for kum with an enclitic mem attached to it. What does that mean? I will explain later, but right now all you need to know is the word for place with the second person suffix. So the tsere and then kaf. So it's your place, speaking to a female. Avadav. So the word for eved, the word eved means servant or slave. In the plural form, it's avadim. And once again, you have the yod at the end, and the yod and the vav here. That indicates this is a third person singular suffix. So his slaves or his servants. And then you have kaspenu. So kesef would be the word for silver, but more generally it's used to denote currency. And here it is in the plural, not plural form. It has a first person plural suffix here. So it's like our silver or our money. So these are examples of words with pronominal suffixes. And just going over it again, these suffixes would be this right here, and then here, and finally here. So that is so you can see which part is the pronominal suffix. Moving on, we're going to do some more translation, and we're continuing the Joseph story in Genesis. Of course, this textbook simplifies it somewhat, and we have some new vocabulary here. I'm just going to scroll through it really quickly, so you can always pause if you want to take a closer look at any specific thing. But here we're going to translate chapter 39 of Genesis. So in verse 1 it states, Vayosef yarad mitzrayma vayken oto Potiphar sris paro sar hatabachim ish mitzri. So in Joseph went down, Egypt words. Remember, we learned about the directional hey. So the word Mitzrayim, it means Egypt, and then the hey at the end indicates that he went Egyptwards or towards Egypt. And then and Potiphar acquired him. Who is Potiphar? He is the official of Pharaoh, and he is a prince of the. Actually, I mentioned this means butcher, but it could also mean like cooks more generally. And then he is an Egyptian man here. Actually, just want to make sure I got that part right. Might have given a different translation. Yeah, there you go, a cook. So I said butcher, but really, it could more generally just mean a cook. And at the end of the verse, it says, Miyad ha'ishmaelim. So from the hand of the Ishmaelites, those are the guys who sold Joseph to Potiphar. In verse 2, we have, Vayhi Adonai et Yosef, Vayhi bevet Adonav, mi hamitzri, Vayar Adonav ki Adonai, ito b'chol asher asa. And so it was, the Lord was with Joseph. So you may have remembered that we identified the word et as the direct definite object marker, but it can also function as the word with. And this actually happens a few other places in the Bible. For example, Genesis 4:1. And Eve, when she gives birth to Cain, says, Kaniti isha et Adonai. So, et in that context means with, and it means with as well in this context. So the Lord is et Yosef, with Joseph. And he was, so this is the word for haya, the word for was, in the Vaiktol form, which indicates that it is a past form in a narrative context. And he was in the house of his Lord, the Egyptian, and his Lord saw that the Lord, Yahweh. So remember, we pronounce this Adonai. So when we're pronouncing it, these two, we'll say them the same, but they have different reference, because this is referring to Potiphar, where this is referring to God. That the Lord was with him in all which he has done, or all which he does. Yeah, by the way, verbal aspect can be a little bit tricky sometimes. So the word asa is in the what you'd call the perfect form, which typically means which means it's a past event, but sometimes in context you'll want to translate it as a present. So in all which he does. I mean, in this context, it could be all he had done as well. But when you're translating, try to use whichever tense in English makes the most sense. Verse 4, Vayimtza Yosef chen be'enav vayasem oto al beto ve'et kol asher lo natan beyado. And Joseph found favor, chen is favor, in his eyes, and he placed him over. So al typically means on or upon, but can also mean over, which is how we're translating it this time. Over his house, and all which is his, he gave in his hand. Verse 5. Vayhi me'az sam oto beveto va'al kol asher lo vayvarech Adonai et bet hamitzri biglal Yosef vayhi birkat Adonai b'kol asher lo bebet uvesadeh. And so it was. From then he placed him in his house and upon all which is his. And God blessed, or the Lord blessed, the house of the Egyptian, Biglal, on account of, or because Joseph, because of Joseph. And so it was, the blessing of the Lord in all which is his. So literally it's all that is to him, but idiomatically in English you want to say all that is his. Sometimes it just doesn't work to use an overly literal translation. You have to be a little bit idiomatic. So all that is his, not all which is to him, in the house and in the field. Verse 6. V'ya'azov kol asher lo biyad Yosef v'lo yada ito ma'uma ki im ha-lechem asher hu akal vayhi Yosef yafe mar'eh. And he left all which is his in the hand of Joseph. And he did not know him anything, if not the bread which he ate. And Joseph was handsome in appearance. So Yafeh means good looking, handsome, beautiful. Mar'eh means appearance. You might notice that it has the word for to see in it, ra'ah. So this is the participial form of it. Actually, no, it's not a participial form. It's an enclitic mem form. I lied. Again, I'll explain what an enclitic mem is after this. Verse 7, Vayhi achar hadvarim ha'ele vatisa eshet Adonav et enea el Yosef vatish'al ki yishkav ima. And so it was. Notice that the word Vayhi comes up quite a lot. It's a very common way of going from one scene to another in Hebrew narratives. And you'll notice in a lot of older translations, this gets translated as "and behold," although I'm more used to translating it as "and so it was." Use whichever translation you prefer. And behold, after these things. So devar can mean word or it can mean thing, and in this context it makes more sense to translate it as things. After these things, and the wife of the Lord lifted her eyes towards Joseph. So lifting up eyes is, of course, a common Hebrew idiom that means looked at. And she asked if he would lie with her. Plot's getting tense. Verse 8. Valo ava vayomer el eshet adonav hen adoni lo yada iti ma babet v'chol asher lo natan biyadi. So, and he was not willing, and he said to the woman, or to the wife of the Lord, if my master did not know to me what is in the house and all which is his, he gave in my hand. So notice there's a bit of an idiomatic expression here. He did not know to me what is in my house. So let me see. I'm just gonna check really quickly how this is typically translated in most English translations, because it's sometimes you're looking at a text and you know what it literally says, but you're a little confused to how it should be understood idiomatically. In those instances, it helps to look at an existing translation. So in the ESV, that is translated, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house. So did not know here means did not have concern for. And then verse 9. Enenu gadol babet haze mimeni v'lo chasach mimeni ma'uma ki im otach ba'asher at ishto ve'zot tihye ra'a gdola le'Elohim. So there is not to us, or we don't have a great in the house. There is no one greater in the house, in this house rather, than me. So remember, we talked about this a while back. The word min can also be used for comparative purposes. So literally, great from me, but idiomatically it would be greater than me. And he did not hold back from me anything, because you in which you are his wife. Let me see, how would that be translated more idiomatically? Okay, except you, if not you. So he did not hold back anything from me, if not you, except for you, in which you are his wife, because you are his wife, and this would be a great evil to God. Verse 10. Vatomer haisha el Yosef yom yom velo shama elea. And the woman spoke to Joseph day after day, and he did not listen to her. And verse 11, Vayhi ke hayom hazeh vayavo habaita li melakto va'en ish me'anshe habayit sham bebayit. So verse 11, and so it was as this day he went to the house, directional hay again, to his work, and there was no man from among the men of the house there in the house. Verse 12. ותתפוש אותו בבגדו ותשאל כי ישכב עמה ויעזוב בגדו בידה ויצא החוצה. And she seized him by his coat, and she asked if he would lie with her. And he left his coat or his garment in her hand, and he went out outside. And verse 13, ותראה כי עזב בגדו בידה ויצא החוצה ותקרא לאנשי ביתה ותאמר האישה העברי בא אלי למען ישכב עמי. So this is verses 13 and 14. And she saw that he left his garment in her hand and went outside. And she cried to the man of the house, of her house, and the woman said, the Hebrew came to me in order to lie with me. Verse 15, Vayishma el koli v'ya'azov bigdo imi v'yetze hachutza. And he heard my voice, and he left his garment with me, and he went outside. Verse 16, Vatasem et bigdo etzla ad asher adonav ba el veto. And she placed his garment beside, so etzel means to the side of, beside her, ad asher, until that her husband came to his house. Verse 17, Vatomer eleha kadvarim haele ba'elai ha'eved ha'ivri lema'an yishkav imi. And she said to him, just as these words, he came to me, the Hebrew servant, in order that, so that he may lie with me. Verse 18, Vaishma et koli ya'azov bigdo imi vayetze hachutza. And he listened to my voice, and he heard my voice, and he left his garment with me, and he went outside. Verse 19, Vaishma adonav et divrei ishto ka'asher amra elav kadvarim ha'ele asal li avdecha vayichar apo. And his master heard the words of his wife, or listened to the words of his wife. Shama can mean to hear, or it can mean to listen. Use whichever one makes the most sense in context. Just as she said to him, these words, he did to me, your servant. And he was mad. So yichar af it's like literally the face is heating up. Idiomatically means became angry. And then verse 20, ויקח אותו אדוני ויתן אל בית הסוהר, מקום אשר אסורי המלך שם. And he took him, his Lord took him, his master took him, and he gave to the house of the prison. So this just means prison. They put beit before it. A place which the prison of which is of the prisoners of the king there. That is the place of the prisoners of the king, in other words. All right, 3 more verses. And we'll get to the grammar section of this presentation. Verse 21. Vahi Adonai et Yosef vayas imo chased vaiten chino be'enei sar hasohar. And so it was. The Lord was with Joseph. Remember, I explained that this is not always a direct definite object marker. It sometimes means with. And he did with him loving kindness or mercy. Or he did for him, he showed him great mercy, if you want to be more idiomatic. And he gave his favor in his eyes, in the eyes of the master of the prison, or the prison guard, basically. Verse 22. Vaiten sar bet hasohar biyad Yosef et kol haasirim asher bevet hasohar ve'et kol hamlaka asher asu sham. And the leader of the prison gave into Joseph's hand all of the prisoners which were in the prison, and all of the work which they did there. So you'll notice that chapter 39 has bookends in it. It ends more or less the same way it began. Joseph finds himself somewhere, and he finds favor there, and he's put in charge. We even have the same word used, same words used. So the master of the prison is called Asar, just as Potiphar is called Asar. And the same words, the Lord was with Joseph in verse 2, and you have that again here. And the Lord was with Joseph. Vahi Adonai et Yosef. So, and of course, this is how a lot of Hebrew narrative works. There are chiasms in the storyline, and they form bookends from one end to the other. Now, where was I? All right, the last verse. V'lo ra'a sar bet hasohar et kol mu'uma biado ba'asher Adonai ito b'chol asher asa. And he did not, and the master of the prison did not see, or had no concern for, rather, anything, all of anything that was in his hand, in which the Lord was with him, because the Lord was with him in all that he did. So that phrase, Adonai et Yosef, or Adonai ito, it's a refrain throughout chapter 39. The Lord is with Joseph. So now you're, hopefully if you're following along, you're getting the hang of some of this translation stuff, and you can see exactly how it works. So try to read over the text yourself. If you want an extra challenge, you can read the original unabridged version in the Hebrew Bible. If you want to go at it a little bit easier, use the simplified version that is found here in the workbook. Moving on, let's get to the grammar. So chapter 9 of the Learning Biblical Hebrew textbook is titled Learning How to Read Intuitively, Common Patterns in Hebrew Nouns. As you remember, words in Hebrew tend to come in 3 consonants, and all of the words with related meanings are basically variations on those 3 consonants. So if you know the meaning of a verbal root, you can anticipate the meaning of an unfamiliar word from the same root simply because you know the significance of the formation patterns. So there's basically 2 aspects to it. There is the root, and then there's the pattern that it forms. Once you identify the root, you've already figured out half of what you need to know to discern the meaning. The second half, of course, would be the pattern or the stem that comes in. So there are certain regular patterns that will come up frequently in Hebrew. Once you've learned to recognize them, it becomes a lot easier to identify words in context. Even when you're encountering a word for the first time, you could pretty much figure out what it means just by looking at those 2 things. And in this chapter, we'll look at some of the common patterns. Usually, it's usually either prefixes or suffixes, and we'll see some of the common ones. The most common ones that you will encounter is something called the Pre-Formative Mem. So as the name implies, it's a mem that is prefixed to the word. And this will indicate a noun. This will create a noun rather that indicates a place, an instrument, an abstraction. And here are some examples. So the word makom, which we've encountered a few times, it means place. Notice that it's the word kum, to stand, and then a mem attached in the beginning. By the way, you'll notice that the vowel that comes with it tends to vary, but it's always a mem. So a mishkav, a place where you lie. The word shachav is here, and then there's a mem, and that means a bed. And then the word migdal, it's literally a tall place from the word gadal, which means to be great or to be tall. And this is the word for tower. Now you have the word mamlacha. It has the word from malach, to rule. Notice that the word for king also comes from this 3 consonant root, and it means a ruling place, or in other words, a kingdom. And then you have a motza. This comes from yatsa, which means to go out, and this is the place where you go out, in other words, an exit. And then a moshav. This comes from yashav, and means a place where you sit or a place where you dwell. Notice that the yod usually drops out in these kinds of formations. In these 2 cases, they're replaced with a cholem vav. So moshav means a seat or a dwelling. So which one does it mean? Again, context. So an instrument. So you have a ma'akelet. So you have the root akal, to eat, in the middle. So this is the thing used to eat. In other words, it is a knife. A mar'eh, or a mar'ah, the seeing instrument. Not to be confused with mar'eh, which means appearance. We'll encounter that later. So a mar'ah is a mirror. And then you have a mafteach, which is something used to open, from the verb patach. And that means a key. And here are some abstractions. So you have a ma'akal, which is a thing that you eat. In other words, food. Not to be confused with ma'akelet, which is a thing you use to eat with. Milchama. So from the word lacham, which means to fight, means battle. So sometimes just because they have the same three consonants doesn't mean they're related. The word lechem, which means bread, has the same three consonants, but obviously means something completely different. Watch out for that. So the general rule that I mentioned has exceptions, or sometimes the same three-letter root can have two sets of meanings. Mispar. So from safar, which means to count, it is something that is counted, in other words, a number. A mitzvah, which is something that is commanded, from tzava, which means or to command. So this is a commandment. A thing that you do is a ma'aseh, and from the verb asa, and this means a work or a deed. Something that from the verb ra'ah you have mar'eh, which means appearance, and then finally motza, something something that goes out of someone, so it means an utterance. Notice that motza can mean both an utterance and an exit. So this is where, again, you need context to know which one is being meant in any given instance. Otherwise, you're not going to tell the difference. Aside from the preformative mem, you can also have a yod, a chirek yod suffixed to a word, or in the case of feminine, a chirek yod and a tav. And this is used to indicate a place of origin, or like a nationality. So think about how in the English language we add "ite" to something: Israelite, Ishmaelite, Canaanite, etc. So it functions the same way in Hebrew. So you have an Ivri, which is a Hebrew, or in feminine Ivrit. A Mitzri or a Mitzrit is an Egyptian. A Moavi or Moavi is a, I think this is a typo. This should say Moavit. But a Moavi or Moavit means a Moabite. So other than that, there's also traits or professions. So in this case, there are no suffixes or prefixes. How these are identified is through a certain pattern of nikudot, which is the patach, the kamets, and then the dagesh, or dagesh kamets rather. So you have ganav, which is a thief, dayan, which is a judge, achata, which is a sinner, arash, which means a horseman. So, and here are the patterns that they're derived from. Finally, you have abstract nouns, and usually there are three suffixes that they could end with. You have on, it, or ut. So some examples include reshit for beginning, aharit for end or outcome, yaldut for childhood, malkut for royalty, zicharon for commemoration, bizayon for contempt, pitron for interpretation, acharon for either later or the west, depending on context, rishon for first or former. This one will come up later because this is also an ordinal number. So note that it can mean both those things. So note that these are the verbs that they are derived from. One last pattern that you should note is geminate. So you have a pattern that begins with a tav with a dagesh and a shva. There are four examples listed here. Tefillah, which means a prayer. A techillah, which means a praise. Techillah, which means beginning. Sorry, tehillah and techillah. Tehillah is praise. Techillah is beginning. And techina, which means supplication or request for grace. So these are some of the common the main patterns that you need to learn. If you know this and you know the verbal roots, you can identify pretty much any Hebrew word that you run into, even if you're running into it for the first time. And that makes learning vocab so much easier because it reduces the amount of memorization that you have to do and makes internalizing vocabulary much quicker. Now, moving on, I want to tackle numbers in this session as well. Um, so, just like with any number in any language, there are two different um, types of numbers. You have cardinal numbers and ordinal numbers. Cardinal numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ordinal numbers would be first, second, third, fourth, fifth. And Hebrew has both, and they can be expressed in one of two ways. Either you write out the word in full, or you use a letter to represent it. And in the Hebrew Bible, the vast majority of the time, it's done by writing out. And this version, where you use a symbol, usually it's used for chapter headings in a Hebrew Bible. So first chapter would be Berek Aleph, second chapter would be Berek Bet, etc., etc. And the way it is written, the way this is written the way any number is usually written in Hebrew, it's a little different than in English. So you mention them from smallest to largest. So you have the ones, the tens, the hundreds, the thousands. So 147 would be in Hebrew would be 7 and 40 and 100. And if you want to see a great example of this, go to Numbers chapter 1. There are several examples of that there. In fact, if you have a little bit of time at the end, I can show you. And in Hebrew, when you add a noun next after the number, for 2, the numbers, it gets a little complicated here. For the numbers 2 through 19, you will use a plural noun, but for numbers 20 upwards, you will use a singular noun. So in Genesis 47:28, you have a great example of this. Sheva shanim ba'arba'im me'ot shana. So Sheva shanim means 7 years. Okay, so note the plural form shanim. And then the arba'im me'ot shana. And 40 and 100 years. Except that you have the singular form shana here, whereas here it's the plural form shanim. So this is 147 years and 140 years. Or in other words, 147 years. Isn't it fun? And when you're reading it for the first time, it might throw you off. Just remember the rules that we're discussing right now. And one of the other things that can be confusing about numbers is that they don't follow the rules that we mentioned about gender. Whereas in most nouns and adjectives, the he at the end indicates something is feminine. With numbers, the he usually indicates that it is actually masculine rather than feminine. So shalosh is feminine, shalosha is masculine. Arba is feminine, arba'a is masculine. Now, the first two numbers do not follow this rule. The word for one is echad in the masculine, but it's achat in feminine. Notice the tav here will be, and then for number 2, it's shnaim in the masculine, and then shtaim in the feminine. So, but other than these first two numbers, once you get from number 3 onwards, you can predictably remember that the gender endings flip. So you have a hey for masculine and no hey for feminine. And there is one alternate form of cardinal number that I should mention, which is the construct form for 1. So this is the basic form of it, but if it's used in a construct, you will use the form ashte. So 1 of something is ashte davar. And then ordinal numbers. So here is the table for numbers. You have cardinal on the right, ordinal on the left. We haven't explained what ordinal numbers are yet or how they work in Hebrew, but we'll get to that shortly. But suffice to say, you can see here what they are. So ordinal numbers, it's first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, etc. And in the masculine form, you get a duplication of the Hirek Yod. So you have 2 Hirek Yods in a row for most of them, except the word for sixth, which is Shishi. So you have Shne, Shlishi, Revi'i, Kamishi, Shishi, Rishvi'i, Tashi'i, and Asiri. In ordinal, you have the Tav added at the end as well. So Shenit, Shlishit, Revi'it, etc., etc. It's fairly predictable once you know what the rules are. The hard part is internalizing the rules. Let me see. Once you get to the numbers past 11, here's where it gets a little bit more complicated. So for 11 to 19, it's fairly simple. So it's Asar, Shne Asar, Shlosh Asar. Remember that we mentioned the ones first before the tens. So Shesh Vasar, etc. Once you get to multiples of 10, it becomes slightly different. So for Esrim, so for number 20, it's basically the word for 10, Asar, with a plural ending. So 20 is Esrim. Every multiple of 10 after that, it becomes the singles digit with the plural ending. So 30, so remember shlosh means 3. So 30 would be shloshim. And you can guess what the other forms are. Arba'im is 40, chamishim is 50, shishim is 60, etc., etc. And then with there's 2 of something. With thousands, it's fairly simple. So it's the number, then the word in question. So me'ot means 100, elef means 1,000. Note that if it's 2 of something, you add a dual form to it. So 200 is motaim. And then elef, if it's 2,000, it's alpaim. So here are the forms right here. So me'ah is 100, motaim is 200, shlosh me'ot, 300s. So and then thousands, elef, alpaim, as I mentioned, shlosh alafim for 3,000. So ribo is for 10,000, shne ribo is for 20,000. So here the dual form does not apply, and then shlosh ribo, etc., etc. And then every other number is basically combinations of these that we just learned. You have to just it's what if you're translating Hebrew texts, and you know your 1 to 9, you can more or less guess most numbers. And I already mentioned this rule for numbers 11 to 19. I don't need to go through that again. For number 123, it would be shlosh ve'esrim u'me'ah. So this is the word for 3, it's the word for 20, it's the word for 100. 3 and 20 and 100. And if you are using the alphabet to represent numbers, how that would work, and this is not as critical because it's not used in, it's hardly ever used in classical Hebrew. It's mostly used in later Hebrew, where these are used to insert chapter divisions. But letters Aleph through Tet represent numbers 1 through 9. The letters Yod through Tzadeh represent the numbers 10 to 90. And then Qaf to Tet, numbers 100 to 400. And then the final forms of Kaf, Mem, Nun, Pe, and then Tzadeh would be 500 to 900. So it's the same rule that I mentioned will apply. So actually, you would actually mention this the higher number first. So the word for 11 would be Yod Aleph. 12 would be Yod Bet. 13 would be Yod Gimel, etc. It gets a little weird with the numbers 15 through 16 because normally that would be Yod Vav and Yod He. However, you may recognize that this looks a little too similar to the Tetragrammaton, and Hebrews don't want to accidentally pronounce the sacred name, so they decided that for numbers 15 and 16, they will take the letter Tet, and then they will add either the Vav or the Zayin. So 9 and 6 is the word for 15, and then 9 and 7 is the word for 16. And this threw me off the first time I saw it because it was like Yod Gimel, Yod Dalet, then suddenly it was Tet Vav and Tet Zayin. Just remember that this rule exists. And now that's done. The one more thing I want to do before we close off for this session is to look at a few passages of scripture that have numbers in them. So one of the main places that I want to look at is the creation account in Genesis. So remember in verse 5, it says, Vayikra Elohim la'or yom v'lechoshek ha'layla va'erev vayivoker yom echad. Notice that although our English translations say the first day, this is a cardinal number, so it's literally day 1. This is one of those enigmatic things about the first chapter of Genesis. It doesn't say Yom HaRishon, which is the normal cardinal form that we would expect to see here, but rather day 1. Once we get to all the subsequent days, though, it switches to ordinal form, and it's fairly predictable. So Yom Sheni is the second day, verse 8. Verse 13, Yom Shlishi, third day. Verse 19, Yom Revi'i, the fourth day. Verse 23, Yom Chamishi, the fifth day. And then verse 31, Yom Hashishi, the sixth day. Notice that for this they added the definite article before the ordinal. So it's a little weird like that. The previous ordinals don't have the definite article, but this one does. And then Bayom Ha-Shvi'i. This one also has the definite article on it. So in the seventh day. There is a textual variant here, by the way. If you look at the Septuagint, actually, where is it? Not this one. On the seventh day from all the work. Ah, there we go. In the beginning of verse 2, Bayom Hashvi'i. In the Septuagint, this is actually the sixth day. I'm not going to get into all the specifics of that, but just want to make note that that exists. And it's not just the Septuagint, it's also, let me pull it up, all right? Because this is one of those fun little factoids that might be of interest to some of you. So you see, Vaikal Elohim Bayom Hashvi'i, and the Lord finished on the seventh day. Samaritan Pentateuch, Vaikal Elohim Bayom Hashishi, and the Lord finished on the sixth day. Textual variant, and of course the same as Septuagint, but we won't look at that because it's not Hebrew. And finally, let's look at some of the figures in Numbers chapter 1. I won't go through all of them. Let's take just maybe the first 3 items. So you have some examples of numbers being stacked on top of one another. Verse 21. Bekudehem lemate Reuven shisha ve'arba'im elef v'chamesh me'ot. So in English, the ones who are listed in the tribe of Reuven is 640,500. In English, 46,500. Verse 23. Pekudehem lemate Shimon tish'a ve'chamishim elef u'shlosh me'ot. And those listed from the tribe of Shimon or Simeon are 9,050,000 and 300s. English, 59,300. Verse 25. Kudehem lemate Gad Chamisha ve'arba'im elef ve'shesh me'ot ve'chamishim. So that's the ones listed in the tribe of Gad were 540,000 and 650. So 45,650. It helps if you know addition, by the way. Let's do 2 more. Verse 27. Kudehem lemate Yehuda arba'a v'shiv'im elef v'shesh me'ot. And the ones listed from the tribe of Yehuda were 470,600. In English, 74,600. One more, and then if you want more numbers, just read the rest of Numbers 1. There's a lot of them, but for brevity's sake, I'm going to just mention one more figure. Pekudehem lemate Yisachar arba'a v'chamishim elef v'arba'a me'ot. So those listed from the tribe of Issachar or Yisachar were 450,000 and 400s. In English, 54,400. If you want more practice reading numbers, you can look at verse 31, verse 33, verse 35, 37, 39, 41, 43, 46 for more of the same thing. And that is it for our presentation on numerals. So next session, we're going to discuss verbs. So it says introduction to verbs, but really we already briefly looked at some verbs in previous chapters, but this is a more formal introduction to the verbal system. And it's very important to learn verbs because they come up a lot in Hebrew, and you can only get so far doing just nouns and adjectives. So yeah, looking forward to doing that next time.
All right. So considering Phlebas asks, what's the book with the most difficult Hebrew in the Tanakh, in your opinion?
So the general rule that you want to keep in mind is that prose passages like the laws or the historical narratives tend to be easier than the poetry narratives, such as the Psalms or even large chunks of, say, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job. Um, those tend to be more complex, and also um, they will sometimes have different rules governing them. There are more exceptions to the rules in them, and in the case of later Hebrew, such as um, what you might find in some of the later prophets, the grammar starts to evolve a bit. So the rules that they go by tend to be a little different from the ones that I just mentioned. But as a rule, the most difficult Hebrew would be the ones in the wisdom books. So Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, etc. If you really want to test your knowledge of Hebrew, try translating the book of Job, see how far you can get with that. Um, I noticed, by the way, someone asked what version of Hebrew I'm using. So for the complete Hebrew passages, it's your standard BHS, the Biblica Hebraica Stuttgartensia. The simplified Hebrew in the exercises are from the Learning Biblical Hebrew workbook. It's basically the same thing, but with some of the more complex grammar taken out. I don't know if that answers that question.
I don't see any others, unless you do.
I think that is pretty much it.
Okay. Excellent. Well, we'll do another one, I imagine, within a couple weeks. Is that
Yeah. Well,
is-
let me see. Probably.
probably? Yeah.
We can talk about it.
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, we'll do another one coming up soon here, Lord willing. And Lewis, as always, thank you so much for coming on and taking your time out to do this.
Mhm.
And everybody, thank y'all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Also, check us out at patreon.com/reason and theology if you want to support what we're doing here. We'll see y'all next time. God bless.